Before the rise of the great Persian kings, before the name Iran was known to the world, a powerful civilization took root in the fertile lowlands and rugged highlands of the ancient plateau. This was the land of Elam, one of the first and most enduring civilizations of the ancient Near East. Centered in the modern-day Khuzestan province, Elamite culture emerged as a contemporary and often a rival to its powerful Mesopotamian neighbors to the west. Around 3200 BCE, as cities like Uruk flourished, the Elamites established their own major urban center at Susa, a city that would become a beacon of political and cultural power for nearly 3 millennia. The inhabitants of this burgeoning civilization developed one of the world's earliest writing systems, known today as Proto-Elamite. This script, composed of complex geometric and abstract signs, remains largely undeciphered, a silent testament to a sophisticated administrative and economic system that required detailed record-keeping. Unlike the unified empires that would follow, the early Elamite state was likely a federation of distinct regions, a dualistic kingdom with its lowland capital at Susa and a highland center at Anshan. This political structure allowed them to control both the resource-rich Zagros Mountains and the agriculturally productive plains, creating a resilient and diverse economy. Elamite society was built upon a foundation of settled agriculture, but its true strength lay in its control of trade routes that connected Mesopotamia with the Iranian plateau and the distant Indus Valley. They were master metal workers, and archaeological finds reveal a distinct artistic tradition, particularly evident in their intricate cylinder seals. These small masterpieces depict not the grand royal scenes of Mesopotamia, but a world of dynamic animal processions, mythological creatures, and complex ritual activities, showcasing a unique cultural identity. Their religious life centered on a pantheon of gods and goddesses, with the powerful deity in Shushinak serving as the divine protector of Susa. The Elamites constructed massive temple complexes and ziggurats, monumental structures that demonstrated the central role of religion in their state and society. Just a quick announcement, if you enjoy this video so far, please subscribe to our channel, as it motivates us to bring you a new story every evening. This is the only kind request tonight, and we won't bother you with it anymore until the very end of today's story. Let's get back to the video. While they borrowed and adapted cultural elements from their neighbors, the Elamites forged a civilization that was distinctly their own, a complex and influential power that laid the cultural and political groundwork for the later empires of the Medes and Persians. Their long history established the Iranian plateau as a cradle of civilization, a region that would continue to shape the course of human history for thousands of years to come. Beginning in the 2nd millennium BCE, a slow yet transformative movement of peoples began to reshape the demographic and political landscape of the Iranian plateau. These were the Indo-Iranian tribes, semi-nomadic pastoralists migrating from the steppes of Central Asia, who brought with them new languages, technologies, and social structures. Their arrival was not a single, unified invasion, but a gradual process of infiltration and settlement that unfolded over centuries. These newcomers, who referred to themselves as Aryans, possessed a significant military advantage through their mastery of horse breeding and the use of the light, spoked-wheel chariot, a technology that revolutionized warfare on the open plains. Early evidence for their presence comes not from their own records, as they were initially a non-literate people, but from the annals of the established powers of the Near East. Assyrian cuneiform texts from the 9th century BCE are the first to make clear distinctions between two of these major tribal groups, the Medes, or the Mada, and the Persians, the Parsua. These records typically describe them as tribute-paying vassals or restive populations on the eastern frontiers of the Assyrian Empire. The social organization of these early Iranian peoples was tribal, based on a patriarchal clan system led by local chieftains who commanded warrior aristocracies. Their economy was centered on pastoralism, with great wealth measured in herds of cattle, sheep, and especially horses. They practiced limited agriculture, but their semi-nomadic lifestyle allowed them to exploit different ecological zones and gradually expand their areas of settlement, Linguistically, they introduced the Iranian branch of the Indo-European language family to the plateau, a development that would eventually displace the Elamite and other non-Indo-European languages of the region. This linguistic heritage would become the bedrock of the future Persian identity. Their material culture, as seen in archaeological sites like Tepe Sialk, is characterized by a distinctive grey or black pottery and the increasing prevalence of bronze and later iron weaponry. Their religious beliefs were centered on a pantheon of deities representing natural forces and abstract concepts like justice and order, forming the foundation from which the later reforms of Zoroaster would spring. These scattered, competing tribes of Medes and Persians, initially minor players on the periphery of great empires, slowly began to coalesce. They absorbed local populations, established settled agricultural communities, and forged larger confederations, setting the stage for the rise of a new power in the Zagros Mountains that would soon challenge the old order of the ancient world. For centuries, the disparate Median tribes existed under the constant shadow of the formidable Neo-Assyrian Empire, which exacted heavy tribute and launched frequent military campaigns to assert its dominance over the Zagros Mountains. This external pressure served as a powerful catalyst for political unification. The Greek historian Herodotus credits a chieftain named Deiosis with forging these scattered groups into a single cohesive kingdom around the beginning of the 7th century BCE. Deiosis established a new capital at Ecbatana, modern-day Hamadan, and instituted a centralized monarchy, replacing the loose authority of tribal leaders with the absolute power of a king. This foundational act marked the transition from a tribal confederacy to a true territorial state. The nascent Median kingdom grew in strength under his successors, who continued to consolidate their power and expand their influence. The most pivotal figure in this ascent was Cyaxares, who came to the throne around 625 BCE. He fundamentally reformed the Median army, organizing his forces into specialized units of spearmen, archers, and cavalry, a tactical innovation that transformed them from a tribal militia into a disciplined and effective imperial army. Recognizing a shared enemy, Cyaxares forged a strategic alliance with Nabopolassar, the founder of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. This Medo-Babylonian coalition launched a coordinated assault on the heart of Assyrian power. In 614 BCE, the Medes sacked the great Assyrian religious center of Assur, and 2 years later, in 612 BCE, the combined armies achieved their ultimate objective, the complete destruction of the Assyrian capital, Nineveh. The fall of Nineveh was a world-altering event that obliterated the Assyrian state and left a power vacuum in the Near East. The victors divided the spoils, with the Medes claiming the northern territories, including northern Mesopotamia, Armenia, and parts of eastern Anatolia. The Median Empire's expansion westward brought them into conflict with the powerful kingdom of Lydia. Their final confrontation, the Battle of the Halys River in 585 BCE, was famously halted by a solar eclipse, an event interpreted by both sides as a divine omen. A peace treaty was quickly concluded, establishing the Halys River as the permanent border between the two empires. In less than half a century, the Medes had risen from subjugated vassals to rulers of a vast domain, creating the First Iranian Empire and setting the political stage for their Persian kinsmen to build an even greater world power. Following the Median conquest of Assyria, the political center of the Iranian plateau rested firmly at Ecbatana, while their Persian kinsmen to the south remained in a state of vassalage. This subordinate relationship, however, would be fundamentally altered by the emergence of a single, transformative figure from the Persian royal house of Achaemenid. Cyrus II, son of the Persian king Cambyses I, ascended to the throne of the vassal kingdom of Anshan around 559 BCE. His claim to power was significantly bolstered by his maternal lineage. His mother, Mandane, was the daughter of the ruling Median monarch, Astyages. This direct link to the Median royal family provided Cyrus with a degree of legitimacy that would prove crucial in the events to come. Astyages' reign was marked by growing discontent among the Median aristocracy, who viewed his rule as increasingly arbitrary and despotic. Cyrus capitalized on this internal dissent, inciting a carefully planned revolt against his grandfather's authority. The ensuing conflict was less a war between two distinct nations and more of an internal power struggle for control of the Iranian peoples. The decisive factor in Cyrus's success was the defection of significant portions of the Median army. Key Median nobles and generals, disillusioned with Astyages, saw in the young Persian king a more capable and dynamic leader. According to Babylonian records, the Median army mutinied, seizing Astyages and delivering him to Cyrus. By 550 BCE, the conflict culminated in Cyrus's capture of the Median capital, Ecbatana. This event marks the definitive end of the Median Empire and the birth of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Cyrus's actions following his victory were unprecedented and set the foundation for his future success. Instead of executing Astyages or enslaving the Median population, he instituted a revolutionary policy of unification and integration. Astyages' life was spared, and the Medes were treated not as a conquered people, but as partners in the new imperial structure. Cyrus adopted the Median administrative framework, retained Median nobles in high-ranking positions within the government and military, and fused the court protocols of both peoples. This fusion created a truly Medo-Persian state, with the Persians as the senior partners. By uniting the two most powerful Iranian groups, Cyrus secured a vast, stable heartland and gained control of the formidable Median military, providing him with the immense resources and manpower needed to embark on the series of conquests that would create the largest empire the world had yet seen. With the Medo-Persian heartland secured, Cyrus the Great directed his formidable new army westward, a move that immediately alarmed the existing powers of the Near East. The first major state to challenge the nascent Achaemenid Empire was the Kingdom of Lydia, a wealthy Anatolian power under the rule of King Croesus. After an indecisive battle at Pteria, Croesus retreated to his heavily fortified capital of Sardis, expecting Cyrus to halt his campaign for the winter. In a display of the strategic genius that would define his reign, Cyrus pursued the Lydians through the harsh winter weather, forcing a confrontation at the Battle of Thymbra. Here, he employed a novel tactic, placing his camels at the front of his lines. The unfamiliar scent of the camels threw the elite Lydian cavalry into disarray, neutralizing their primary military advantage and leading to a decisive Persian victory. Sardis fell shortly thereafter in 546 BCE, and all of Asia Minor, including the prosperous Greek Ionian city-states, was brought under Persian control. Cyrus then turned his attention to the greatest prize in Mesopotamia, the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The Babylonian king, Nabonidus, was deeply unpopular with the populace and, crucially, with the powerful priesthood of Marduk, Babylon's patron deity. Cyrus launched a masterful propaganda campaign, portraying himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as a liberator chosen by Marduk to restore traditional religious order. In 539 BCE, the Persian army met the Babylonians at the Battle of Opis on the Tigris River, shattering their forces. Following this victory, the great city of Babylon surrendered without a protracted siege. Cyrus's entrance into the city was peaceful, and his subsequent policies were revolutionary. In a decree famously recorded on the Cyrus cylinder, he allowed the numerous peoples who had been forcibly relocated by the Babylonians, most notably the Jews, to return to their homelands and rebuild their temples. This policy of unprecedented religious and cultural tolerance stood in stark contrast to the brutal practices of his Assyrian and Babylonian predecessors. With the conquests of Lydia and Babylonia, Cyrus had, in just over a decade, forged an empire that stretched from the Aegean Sea to Central Asia, creating the first true world empire and establishing a new paradigm of imperial rule based on administration and tolerance. Upon the death of Cyrus the Great in 530 BCE during a campaign in the east, the Achaemenid throne passed to his eldest son, Cambyses II. Inheriting a consolidated and vast empire, Cambyses focused his ambition on the one major power that had remained outside his father's control, the ancient and wealthy kingdom of Egypt. This objective was not a sudden impulse, but the logical continuation of Achaemenid expansionist policy. The invasion, launched in 525 BCE, was a masterpiece of logistical planning. Cambyses secured the allegiance of the Phoenician and Cypriot fleets, whose maritime power was essential for naval support and for transporting supplies along the coast. He also forged a crucial alliance with the Arab chieftains who controlled the Sinai Peninsula, ensuring his army would have a reliable supply of water during the perilous desert crossing. The Egyptian forces, under the command of the new pharaoh Psamtik III, met the Persian army at the strategic fortress of Pelusium, the gateway to the Nile Delta. The ensuing battle was a decisive victory for the Persians, shattering the Egyptian army and opening the way to the capital. Following the victory, Cambyses captured the great city of Memphis and took Psamtik III prisoner, effectively ending the 26th dynasty's rule. In a continuation of his father's administrative policies, Cambyses was formally crowned as pharaoh, adopting the traditional regalia and titles, and initially showing respect for Egypt's powerful religious institutions. However, his subsequent military ventures were met with failure. A planned expedition to Carthage was abandoned when the Phoenician navy refused to attack their Punic kinsmen. A detachment of his army sent to the oasis of Siwa vanished in a sandstorm, and a major campaign south into Nubia was forced to retreat due to severe logistical problems and heavy casualties. According to later Greek sources, particularly Herodotus, these failures precipitated a descent into madness and tyranny, marked by the desecration of Egyptian temples and the killing of the sacred Apis bull. While these accounts are likely exaggerated by hostile propaganda, they reflect a period of harsh rule. In 522 BCE, news reached Egypt that a usurper claiming to be Cambyses' long-dead brother, Bardia, had seized the Persian throne. As Cambyses rushed back to confront the rebellion, he died under mysterious circumstances in Syria. His death without an heir plunged the empire into a profound succession crisis, setting the stage for the rise of Darius the Great. The crisis following the death of Cambyses I was resolved by Darius I, a figure from a collateral branch of the Achaemenid dynasty. According to his own account, immortalized on the Behistun inscription, the man claiming to be Bardia was in fact a Magian usurper named Gaumata. In 522 BCE, Darius, with the aid of 6 other Persian nobles, assassinated Gaumata and seized the throne. This act, however, did not immediately secure his rule. The empire erupted in a series of widespread revolts, as provinces from Babylonia to Media took the opportunity to reclaim their independence. The first year of Darius's reign was a whirlwind of constant warfare. He fought 19 major battles in a single year to crush the rebellions and reunify the empire under his authority. Once the empire was pacified, Darius proved to be an administrative genius, undertaking a radical and systematic reorganization of the state that transformed Cyrus's conquests into a stable, enduring institution. His most significant reform was the establishment of the satrapy system. He divided the vast empire into approximately 20 provinces, or satrapies, each administered by a governor known as a satrap. To prevent these powerful governors from accumulating enough power to challenge the throne, Darius instituted a brilliant system of checks and balances. Within each satrapy, he appointed a separate military commander and a chief financial official, both of whom reported directly to the king, not the satrap. Furthermore, he created a network of royal inspectors, known as the King's Eyes and Ears, who travelled unannounced throughout the empire to monitor officials and report on local conditions. To further unify his diverse realm, Darius introduced a standardized imperial currency, the gold daric and the silver siglos. This reform, along with standardized weights and measures, facilitated trade and allowed for the implementation of a predictable empire-wide system of taxation. He invested heavily in infrastructure, most famously constructing the Royal Road, a highway stretching over 500 kilometers from Susa in Persia to Sardis in Anatolia. complete with relay stations for royal messengers. He also completed a canal connecting the Nile River to the Red Sea, further stimulating international commerce. Through these profound administrative, economic, and infrastructural reforms, Darius the Great was not merely a conqueror, but the true architect of the Achaemenid Empire, creating a sophisticated and efficient state that would stand for 2 centuries. Darius the Great's administrative reforms were not mere concepts, but practical systems that required meticulous implementation to function across his vast and diverse empire. The satrapy system, his provincial framework, was underpinned by a revolutionary approach to imperial finance. Unlike previous empires that relied on irregular plunder and tribute, Darius established a system of fixed annual tax assessments for each province, payable in a combination of precious metals and in-kind goods, reflecting the region's unique resources. Records indicate that the satrapy of Babylonia, the wealthiest province, paid a staggering 1,000 silver talents annually, along with providing for the Persian army for 4 months of the year. The satrapy of India contributed tribute in gold dust, while Egypt provided grain and silver, and Media supplied thousands of horses, mules, and sheep for the royal court and army. This predictable revenue stream allowed for long-term state planning, funding massive construction projects like the new capital at Persepolis, and maintaining a professional standing army. The administration within each satrapy was a microcosm of the imperial court, with the satrap maintaining a provincial capital, a bureaucracy, and a legal system that handled local disputes. Those subjects could appeal to the king. To bind these disparate provinces together, Darius's infrastructure projects were essential. The royal road was the artery of this system. Its main section ran from Susa to Sardis, a distance of over 500 kilometers, but the network extended throughout the empire. The road was meticulously maintained and equipped with 111 posting stations, situated at regular intervals. At each station, fresh horses and riders were kept ready for the imperial post, a relay system known as the Angarium. This service was reserved for official state correspondence and allowed royal decrees and intelligence reports to travel at astonishing speeds. The Greek historian Herodotus noted that a message could traverse the entire length of the main road in as little as 7 to 9 days, a journey that would take a normal traveller 3 months. This rapid communication network was the central nervous system of the empire, enabling Darius to receive information from his eyes and ears and dispatch military orders with unprecedented efficiency, effectively weaving the satrapies into a single, cohesive political entity. To secure his precarious hold on the throne, Darius the Great commissioned a monumental piece of political propaganda carved high into a limestone cliff face at Behistun, along a major caravan route in western Iran. This was not merely a record, but a public declaration designed to be seen by countless travelers and to broadcast his legitimacy across the empire. The monument, situated some 100 meters above the ground, consists of a large bas-relief and extensive accompanying texts. The relief itself is a powerful visual narrative. It depicts a life-size Darius, armed with a bow, standing in triumph with his left foot on the chest of the slain usurper, Gaumata. Behind Darius stand 2 of his loyal attendants, while before him a procession of 9 captured rebel leaders, or liar kings, are bound together with ropes around their necks. Floating protectively above the entire scene is the winged symbol of Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity of Zoroastrianism, bestowing divine sanction upon Darius's actions and reinforcing his claim as the chosen ruler. The text, inscribed in 3 different cuneiform scripts, Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, was a deliberate choice to ensure the message was accessible to the 3 major linguistic and cultural groups of the Achaemenid heartland. The inscription begins by carefully tracing Darius's genealogy back to Achaemenes, establishing his noble lineage and right to rule, even though he was not in the direct line of succession from Cyrus the Great. It then provides Darius's official account of the tumultuous events of 522 BCE, the secret murder of Cambyses' brother Bardia, the subsequent impersonation of Bardia by the Magian usurper Gaumata, and his own heroic overthrow of this liar king with divine aid. The inscription meticulously documents the subsequent suppression of the numerous rebellions that erupted throughout the empire, portraying them not as legitimate bids for independence, but as deceitful acts against the rightful, divinely ordained order. For modern history, the Behistun inscription proved to be of monumental importance beyond its political message. Its trilingual nature provided the essential key for the decipherment of cuneiform, much like the Rosetta Stone did for Egyptian hieroglyphs. While cities like Susa, Babylon, and Ecbatana served as administrative capitals, Darius the Great initiated the construction of a new grand ceremonial center in the heart of the Persian homeland, Parsa. This complex, known to the Greeks as Persepolis, was not intended for day-to-day governance, but as a magnificent stage for royal ceremony and a symbolic representation of the Achaemenid worldview. Begun around 515 BCE, its construction would continue under his successors, Xerxes I and Artaxerxes I. The entire complex was built on a massive, raised stone terrace, partly natural and partly man-made, covering over 125,000 square meters. Its architecture was a deliberate and sophisticated fusion of styles from across the empire, a visual metaphor for the unity of diverse peoples under Persian rule. Lydian and Ionian Greek artisans contributed to the stonework and column designs. Median craftsmen influenced the layout, and elements of Egyptian and Babylonian architecture were also incorporated. The grand entrance was the Gate of All Nations, built by Xerxes, guarded by colossal stone lamassu figures of Assyrian inspiration. Inscriptions in 3 languages on the gate declared that through it, the many subject nations entered the presence of the king. The most impressive structure was the Apadana, or audience hall, a vast hypostyle hall that could accommodate thousands. Its roof was supported by 72 towering columns, each over 20 meters high, topped with elaborate capitals in the shape of twin-headed bulls or eagles. The grand stairways leading to the Apadana are famed for their extensive and meticulously preserved bas-reliefs. These carvings are not scenes of warfare, but of order and cooperation. They depict a long procession of delegations from every corner of the empire, from Ethiopians and Libyans to Indians and Scythians, each in their distinct native dress, bringing gifts and tribute for the great king. This imagery reinforced the central ideology of Persepolis. It was the place where the empire of the 4 corners of the world came together in peaceful submission to Achaemenid authority, primarily during the Great Nowruz, or New Year's festival. It was a physical manifestation of the order and prosperity that Persian rule claimed to bring to its subjects. Concurrent with the political consolidation under the early Achaemenids, a profound religious transformation that had begun centuries earlier was solidifying its influence on the Iranian plateau. The prophet Zarathustra, or Zoroaster as known to the Greeks, initiated a revolutionary shift away from the traditional polytheistic Indo-Iranian pantheon. While the exact timeline of his life is a subject of intense scholarly debate, with estimates ranging from 1500 to 600 BCE, his teachings represented a radical departure from existing religious thought. His doctrines are preserved in their oldest form in the Gathas, a collection of 17 hymns composed by the prophet himself, which form the core of the sacred text known as the Avesta. At the heart of Zarathustra's revelation was a form of ethical monotheism centered on the sole worship of Ahura Mazda, the wise lord. Ahura Mazda was presented as the uncreated, supreme creator of the universe, the source of all goodness and the embodiment of Asha, or truth, order, and righteousness. This was a direct challenge to the worship of the numerous devas of the old pantheon, whom Zarathustra recontextualized as malevolent demons or false gods who promoted chaos and disorder. Central to his theology was a cosmic dualism, a perpetual conflict between 2 primordial spirits. Spenta Mainyu, the bounteous spirit of Ahura Mazda, was opposed by Angra Mainyu, the hostile spirit, who represented the principle of Druj the lie, chaos and destruction. This was not a battle between 2 equal gods, but a conflict within creation itself. Zarathustra's most significant contribution was the emphasis on human free will and individual responsibility. He taught that every person is an active participant in this cosmic struggle, possessing the capacity to choose between the path of Asha and the path of Drudge through their thoughts, words, and deeds. This ethical framework demanded personal righteousness and rejected the complex, often immoral, ritualism of the older faith, particularly the practice of intoxicating rituals and bloody animal sacrifices. The faith spread slowly at first, facing significant opposition from the established priesthoods. The turning point came with the conversion of a local ruler, Vishtaspa, who became Zarathustra's patron and helped establish the religion in his domain. The teachings of Zarathustra were preserved and expanded within a body of sacred literature known as the Avesta. While the Gathas represent its most ancient core, later compilations added layers of liturgy, mythology, and lore, creating a comprehensive theological framework. This collection codifies the nature of the divine order and the pivotal role humanity plays within it. The Avesta portrays Ahura Mazda not as a solitary deity, but as a supreme being supported by a council of 7 divine entities, the Amesha Spentas, or bounteous immortals. These are not separate gods, but emanations or aspects of Ahura Mazda himself, representing the fundamental principles of creation. They include Vohumana, the good mind, Ashavahishta, best righteousness, and Kshatravirya, desirable dominion, and they act as the divine instruments through which the universe is governed. This divine order is sustained by the cosmic principle of Asha, the universal law of truth and righteousness that is the blueprint for a perfect creation. The entire Zoroastrian worldview is framed by the great cosmic struggle against Druj, the lie, embodied by the destructive spirit Angra Mainyu, later known as Ahriman. This is not a battle of equals, as Ahura Mazda exists outside of and above the conflict. Instead, the struggle plays out within the finite stage of creation, the material world, and the human heart. Zoroastrian eschatology conceives of world history as a limited, 12,000-year epic divided into 4 ages. The final age begins with the coming of Zarathustra and will culminate in the Frashokareti, the final renovation of the world where evil is ultimately destroyed and creation is restored to its original perfect state. A central element in Zoroastrian ritual is the veneration of fire, Attar, seen as the pure son of Ahura Mazda and the physical manifestation of Asha on earth. Fire temples housed perpetual flames that served as focal points for prayer and represented the divine light and wisdom that believers were to uphold. This belief system placed immense emphasis on the individual's ultimate fate. After death, each soul was believed to face judgment at the Chinvat Bridge, the bridge of the separator. Here, the soul's deeds are weighed. For the righteous, the bridge widens into a pleasant path leading to the house of song, or paradise. For the wicked, it narrows to a razor's edge, and they fall into the abyss of the house of lies, a place of torment. The western expansion of the Achaemenid Empire under Cyrus and Darius had brought the politically fragmented but culturally vibrant Greek city-states of Ionia, located on the Aegean coast of Anatolia, under Persian dominion. While Persian rule was often indirect, it was not benign. The empire supported local tyrants who governed the cities on Persia's behalf, ensuring the collection of tribute and the levying of troops for imperial campaigns. This system suppressed the democratic and oligarchic traditions of the polis, creating a deep-seated resentment among the Ionian Greeks. The immediate catalyst for open conflict arose from the personal ambition and political miscalculation of one such leader, Aristagoras, the tyrant of Miletus. In 500 BCE, he persuaded the Persian satrap Artaphanes to support a joint expedition to conquer the island of Naxos, promising an easy victory that would expand Persian influence in the Aegean. The expedition in 499 BCE was a complete failure, bogged down by a long siege and internal disputes. Facing demotion and punishment from Darius for this costly debacle, Aristagoras chose to save himself by inciting a general rebellion against Persian authority. To broaden his support, he resigned his tyranny and championed a democratic movement, a move that resonated deeply with the disenfranchised populations of other Ionian cities. The revolt spread rapidly from its epicenter in Miletus throughout the region. Aristagoras sought military aid from mainland Greece, but his appeal to Sparta was famously rejected by King Cleomenes I, who was unwilling to commit forces to a distant conflict. However, the newly established democracy of Athens, viewing the Persians as a potential threat and feeling a sense of kinship with the Ionians, agreed to send a fleet of 20 triremes. The city of Eretria also contributed 5 ships. This intervention marked the first direct military confrontation between mainland Greek states and the Persian Empire. In 498 BCE, the combined Ionian and allied forces achieved a significant early success by marching inland and sacking Sardis, the wealthy capital of the Lydian satrapy. They burned the lower city, but were unable to capture the heavily fortified citadel held by Artaphanes. The act of burning a major Persian administrative centre was an unforgivable affront to imperial prestige. The Persian response, once mobilized, was systematic and overwhelming. Over the next few years, Persian land and sea forces began to methodically reconquer the rebellious territories. The decisive confrontation came in 494 BCE at the naval battle of Lade, off the coast of Miletus. Disunity within the Greek fleet, leading to the withdrawal of the Samian contingent, resulted in a catastrophic defeat for the rebels. The fall of Miletus followed swiftly. The city was besieged, its walls breached, and its population was either killed or deported. By 493 BCE, the last embers of the revolt were extinguished. The Ionian revolt had failed, but its consequences were monumental. It had brought the Greek city-states to the direct and hostile attention of Darius, and the involvement of Athens and Eretria provided the casus belli for his punitive expedition into Greece, setting the stage for the Greco-Persian Wars. The failure of the Ionian revolt directly led to Darius the Great's decision to launch a punitive expedition against mainland Greece in 490 BCE, specifically targeting Athens and Eretria for their roles in the sack of Sardis. This was not a full-scale invasion for conquest, but a targeted naval campaign intended to reassert Persian authority. The expedition was commanded by the Median admiral Datis and Artaphernes the Younger, nephew of the king. The Persian force, transported by a large fleet of triremes, first sailed to the island of Euboea, where they besieged and destroyed the city of Eretria, deporting its population as a warning to other Greek states. From there, guided by the exiled Athenian tyrant Hippias, the Persian fleet landed at the Bay of Marathon on the coast of Attica. The location was strategically chosen for its flat terrain, which was ideal for the deployment of the Persian cavalry, their key military advantage. Upon learning of the Persian landing, the Athenian assembly dispatched the runner Pheidippides to Sparta to request immediate military assistance. But the Spartans were celebrating the religious festival of the Carneia and could not march until the full moon, delaying their aid. Faced with the imminent threat, the Athenian leadership was divided. Some argued for remaining within the city's walls, while others, led by the experienced General Miltiades, advocated for confronting the invaders in open battle. Miltiades' argument prevailed, and the Athenian army, consisting of approximately 10,000 hoplites and a small contingent of about 1,000 soldiers from their ally Plataea, marched to Marathon. For several days, the two armies faced each other in a stalemate. The Athenians, holding the high ground, were hesitant to descend onto the plain where the Persian cavalry could be decisive. The breakthrough came when Miltiades ordered a charge. In a tactical masterstroke, he had intentionally weakened the center of his battle line while heavily reinforcing the wings. The Athenian hoplites ran across the nearly mile-wide plain, a move designed to minimize their exposure to the volleys of the Persian archers. The weak Athenian center buckled under the pressure of the superior Persian infantry, but the powerful Athenian wings crushed the Persian flanks. Instead of pursuing the fleeing enemy on the wings, the Athenian flanks wheeled inward, enveloping and routing the Persian center. The Persians broke and fled in a panic back to their ships, with the Athenians in close pursuit. In the fighting on the beach, the Athenians managed to capture 7 Persian ships before the rest of the fleet escaped. The battle resulted in a decisive victory for the Athenians, who lost only 192 men compared to an estimated 400 Persian dead. The Persian fleet then attempted to sail around Cape Sunion to attack the city of Athens itself, but the Athenian army, in a remarkable feat of endurance, force-marched back and arrived in time to prevent a second landing, forcing the Persian expedition to return to Asia. The Athenian victory at Marathon was a profound humiliation for the Achaemenid Empire, and upon the death of Darius the Great in 486 BCE, the task of avenging it fell to his son and successor, Xerxes I. Unlike his father's limited punitive action, Xerxes planned an invasion on an unprecedented scale, intended for the complete subjugation of Greece. For 4 years, from 484 to 481 BCE, the empire engaged in immense logistical preparations. A massive multinational army was conscripted from every satrapy, and vast supply depots were established along the planned invasion route through Thrace and Macedonia. In a monumental feat of engineering designed to avoid the treacherous coastline that had wrecked a previous Persian fleet, Xerxes ordered the digging of a canal across the isthmus of the Mount Athos Peninsula, a project that took 3 years to complete. The centerpiece of his preparation was the solution to crossing the Hellespont, the strait separating Asia from Europe. The first attempt to build a pontoon bridge using flax and papyrus cables was destroyed by a violent storm. In a display of monarchical rage, Xerxes famously ordered the Hellespont itself to be punished by being whipped 300 times, having fetters thrown into the water, and being branded with hot irons. A second, more robust bridge was then constructed. This engineering marvel consisted of 2 parallel lines of over 300 triremes each, anchored securely and linked together to form a continuous floating roadway more than a mile long. In 480 BCE, this grand army, estimated by ancient sources to number in the hundreds of thousands, assembled at Sardis before marching to the Hellespont. The force was a testament to the empire's diversity, including not just the elite Persian infantry unit known as the Immortals, but also Medes, Scythians, Indians, Ethiopians, and Egyptians. For 7 days and 7 nights, the vast host streamed across the pontoon bridges, a continuous procession of soldiers, cavalry, and supply trains, transitioning from Asia into Europe. This crossing was a profound logistical achievement and a calculated act of psychological warfare, designed to overwhelm the Greeks with a display of irresistible power. With his army now on European soil, Xerxes began his methodical advance southward into the heart of Greece, initiating the second and most formidable phase of the Greco-Persian Wars. As the Persian army advanced south, a congress of Greek city-states, known as the Hellenic League, resolved to make a stand. They chose the narrow coastal pass of Thermopylae as the optimal location to neutralize the vast numerical superiority of the Persian land forces. In August of 480 BCE, a small allied Greek army, led by the Spartan king Leonidas, occupied the pass. The force consisted of 300 elite Spartan hoplites, along with several thousand soldiers from other Peloponnesian states, Phocis, Locris, and notably 700 Thespians. Simultaneously, the allied Greek fleet engaged the Persian navy at the Straits of Artemisium to protect the land force's seaward flank. For several days, the Greeks at Thermopylae repelled frontal assaults from the Persian army, inflicting heavy casualties. The battle turned when a local resident named Ephialtes revealed a mountain track that allowed the Persians to bypass the Greek position and encircle them. Realizing his position was untenable, Leonidas dismissed the bulk of the Greek army, allowing them to retreat. He remained with his 300 Spartans, the Thespians, and a contingent of Thebans, fighting to the death in a last stand. This action, while a tactical defeat, achieved the strategic objective of delaying the Persian advance. Following the victory at Thermopylae, Xerxes' army marched south, capturing and sacking the city of Athens, which had been largely evacuated based on the advice of the statesman Themistocles. The Acropolis was burned, an act of retribution for the sack of Sardis. The allied Greek fleet, having withdrawn from Artemisium, regrouped in the narrow straits of Salamis near Athens. A council of war ensued among the Greek commanders, with many Peloponnesian leaders advocating for a retreat to the Isthmus of Corinth to defend their homeland. Themistocles, the Athenian commander, argued forcefully for a decisive naval engagement in the confines of the straits, where the larger and more numerous Persian ships would be unable to effectively maneuver. To force the engagement, Themistocles employed a ruse, sending a messenger to Xerxes to falsely report that the Greek fleet was in disarray and planned to escape. Deceived, Xerxes ordered his navy to blockade the straits and attack. The ensuing Battle of Salamis was a decisive victory for the Greeks. The heavier Greek triremes proved superior in the close-quarters combat, ramming and sinking a significant portion of the Persian fleet, while Xerxes watched from a throne on the shoreline. The naval defeat was a strategic disaster for Persia, crippling its ability to supply the land army by sea and forcing Xerxes to withdraw the majority of his forces back to Asia. He left his general Mardonius with a substantial army in Thessaly to continue the campaign the following year. The immense military and administrative undertakings of the Achaemenid Empire rested upon a sophisticated economic foundation, which Darius the Great systematically reformed to ensure stability and control. Prior to his reign, the empire's economy was a complex patchwork of barter, tribute paid in kind, and various local currencies, most notably the electrum coinage of the conquered Lydian kingdom. Recognizing the inefficiency of this system, Darius introduced one of the world's first standardized bimetallic monetary systems. The cornerstone of this reform was the golden darik, a coin of exceptionally high purity, weighing approximately 8.4 grams and consisting of nearly 96% pure gold. The coin's iconic imagery depicted the Achaemenid king in a running or kneeling stance, armed with a bow and spear, a powerful and universally recognizable symbol of imperial authority. The darik quickly became the first true international currency, trusted for its consistent weight and purity from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea. To complement the high-value darik, a silver coin, the siglos, was minted for smaller transactions and everyday commerce. The exchange rate was fixed, with 20 sigloi being equivalent to 1 darik, creating a predictable and stable monetary relationship that streamlined trade and financial planning across the diverse satrapies. This standardization revolutionized the collection of taxes, which could now be assessed and paid in a uniform currency, simplifying the imperial treasury's accounting and management of the empire's vast revenues. The new coinage system was also instrumental in maintaining the empire's administrative and military apparatus. It enabled the regular and efficient payment of salaries to the vast bureaucracy of officials, scribes, and judges, as well as the wages for the multinational army and navy. This reliability fostered loyalty and professionalism within the state's institutions. While the darik and siglos were the official imperial currency, the Achaemenid administration demonstrated flexibility by allowing satraps and some autonomous cities to continue minting their own local silver and bronze coinage, which facilitated regional trade without disrupting the overarching imperial standard. The immense quantities of precious metal required for this system were sourced from the tribute and taxes levied on the satrapies, with regions like Lydia and Bactria being particularly rich in gold and silver deposits. This centralized wealth, transformed into a standard medium of exchange, became the economic lifeblood that funded monumental construction projects, maintained the royal road, and financed Persia's extensive military campaigns for 2 centuries. The era following the tumultuous Greco-Persian Wars ushered in a period of strategic re-evaluation for the Achaemenid Empire under Artaxerxes I, who ascended to the throne in 465 BCE. His succession was born from violence. His father, Xerxes I, was assassinated by Artabanus, the commander of the royal bodyguard, in a palace coup. Artaxerxes secured his own rule only by swiftly eliminating Artabanus and his sons, an event that set the tone for a reign defined as much by internal court politics as by imperial policy. His long rule, lasting until 424 BCE, was characterized by a shift from grand expansion to internal consolidation and diplomatic maneuvering. The most significant development in foreign policy was the conclusion of hostilities with the Hellenic world, culminating in the Peace of Callias around 449 BCE. This treaty, whether formal or a de facto understanding, effectively ended direct, large-scale Persian military operations in the Aegean. Achaemenid strategy pivoted from conquest to influence, utilizing the empire's immense wealth to fund and exacerbate rivalries between Greek city-states, most notably between Athens and Sparta. This policy of subsidizing Greek factions would become a mainstay of Persian foreign relations for the next century. Internally, Artaxerxes focused on maintaining the vast administrative structure he inherited. His reign saw the suppression of major rebellions that tested the empire's cohesion. The most serious of these was a prolonged revolt in the satrapy of Egypt, which began around 460 BCE and received significant military support from Athens. It took a sustained Persian campaign, lasting nearly 6 years, to finally crush the rebellion in 454 BCE, a testament to the persistent challenges of governing the empire's diverse territories. Artaxerxes also continued the monumental building programs at Persepolis, completing many of the structures initiated by his father and grandfather, including the Hall of 100 Columns. The court of Artaxerxes was a complex web of influence and intrigue, where powerful figures vied for the king's favor. His mother, Amestris, and his wife, Damaspia, wielded considerable power, and the influence of high-ranking eunuchs and courtiers was a constant feature of palace life. This period of relative external peace allowed for the stabilization of the empire after the shocks of the Greek wars, but the undercurrents of court conspiracy and the increasing reliance on financial power over direct military might in the West signaled a fundamental evolution in the nature of Achaemenid rule. The stability established by Artaxerxes quickly disintegrated upon his death in 424 BCE, plunging the empire into a succession crisis that exposed its underlying fragility. His immediate heir, Xerxes II, ruled for a mere 45 days before being assassinated by his half-brother, Sogdianus, who in turn was overthrown and executed by another half-brother, Darius II. This bloody series of coups set a precedent for the internal decay that would characterize the final century of Achaemenid rule. During the reign of Darius II, the empire faced significant territorial losses, most notably the permanent secession of Egypt around 404 BCE. His administration was also marked by the increasing autonomy of powerful satraps and a deepening involvement in Greek affairs, primarily by providing financial backing to Sparta during the Peloponnesian War. This policy, while successful in weakening Athens, further entrenched the empire's reliance on checkbook diplomacy over direct military might. The subsequent reign of Artaxerxes II Mumon was defined by the most serious internal challenge the dynasty had ever faced: the rebellion of his younger brother, Cyrus the Younger. As satrap of Anatolia, Cyrus used his immense wealth to assemble a large army, including a formidable contingent of 10,000 Greek mercenaries. The two brothers clashed at the Battle of Cunaxa in 401 BCE, where Cyrus was killed. The true significance of this event lay in its aftermath, known as the Anabasis, or the March of the 10,000. The Greek mercenaries, stranded deep within Persian territory, successfully fought their way back to the Black Sea, an epic journey that starkly demonstrated the military vulnerabilities and porous defenses of the empire's interior to the Hellenic world. This exposure of Achaemenid weakness fueled further unrest, culminating in the Great Satrap's Revolt of the 360s BCE. This widespread insurrection involved a coalition of powerful satraps across Anatolia and the Levant, who coordinated their efforts to challenge central authority. Although Artaxerxes II eventually suppressed the rebellion through a combination of military force and political intrigue, the revolt drained the imperial treasury and underscored the centrifugal forces tearing the empire apart. A brief and brutal resurgence occurred under Artaxerxes III, who ruthlessly eliminated potential rivals upon his ascension and successfully reconquered Egypt. However, his reign ended with his assassination by the powerful eunuch Bagoas, who then installed and subsequently poisoned a puppet king, Arses, before placing Darius III on the throne. This final sequence of court intrigues left the Achaemenid Empire internally fractured and politically exhausted, fatally unprepared for the arrival of Alexander of Macedon. In 334 BCE, Alexander of Macedon crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor, leading a highly disciplined army of Macedonians and federated Greeks. His invasion met its first significant challenge at the Granicus River, where he faced a force of Persian satraps. Rejecting cautious counsel, Alexander led a direct cavalry charge across the river, shattering the Persian lines and securing a swift victory that opened the entirety of Anatolia to his advance. The Persian Emperor Darius III, recognizing the gravity of the threat, mobilized the full imperial army and confronted the Macedonians at Issus in 333 BCE. Despite possessing a significant numerical advantage, the Persian force was decisively defeated by Alexander's superior tactics. A targeted charge by the Macedonian companion cavalry, led by Alexander himself, broke through the Persian center and aimed directly for Darius, who fled the battlefield, abandoning his royal chariot and family. This personal defeat of the great king was a catastrophic blow to Achaemenid prestige. Following Issus, Alexander systematically secured the Levant to neutralize the Persian navy. This campaign was highlighted by the formidable 7-month siege of Tyre, where Macedonian engineers constructed a causeway to the island fortress, demonstrating an unprecedented level of military engineering. With the coast secured, Alexander entered Egypt, which, having long chafed under Persian rule, welcomed him as a liberator. There, he was recognized as pharaoh and founded the city of Alexandria. The final confrontation occurred in 331 BCE at the Battle of Gaugamela, on the plains of modern-day Iraq. Darius had gathered an enormous multi-ethnic army, employing scythed chariots and war elephants. Alexander, once again heavily outnumbered, employed a brilliant and complex strategy of an oblique advance, creating a deliberate gap in the Persian line which he exploited with a decisive cavalry wedge. For a second time, Darius III fled, and the Achaemenid military structure effectively collapsed. In the aftermath, the great cities of the empire fell in succession. Babylon and Susa opened their gates, yielding immense treasuries. Alexander then marched to the ceremonial capital, Persepolis, which he controversially ordered burned in 330 BCE, a symbolic act marking the definitive end of the Achaemenid dynasty. Later that year, Darius III was assassinated by his own satrap Bessus. Alexander, positioning himself as the legitimate successor, hunted down the regicide and assumed the full titles of the Persian Great King. In early 330 BCE, after occupying the Achaemenid ceremonial capital of Persepolis for several months, Alexander the Great ordered its destruction. The act remains one of the most debated of his campaign. Ancient sources offer conflicting accounts regarding his motivation, portraying it either as a calculated political statement or an impulsive act of drunken revelry. The most dramatic narrative, advanced by Plutarch and Diodorus Siculus, describes the event transpiring during a lavish banquet. In this version, Thais, an Athenian courtesan accompanying the general Ptolemy, gives a speech urging Alexander to avenge the Persian sack of Athens in 480 BCE by burning the palace of Xerxes. Incited by wine and her words, Alexander allegedly led a drunken procession of his companions to set the complex ablaze with torches. A more sober interpretation, favoured by the historian Arrian, suggests a deliberate policy decision. By destroying Persepolis, the very heart of Achaemenid dynastic legitimacy, and a potent symbol of Persian power, Alexander would signal unequivocally that the old empire was finished. This act would serve as a powerful deterrent to any potential Persian pretenders and solidify his claim as the sole successor, not just a conqueror. The physical destruction was immense. The fire, fed by the massive cedarwood beams of the roofs and the opulent tapestries within, raged with incredible intensity. Archaeological evidence corroborates the accounts of a catastrophic fire, with thick layers of ash and soot found throughout the ruins, and stone columns cracked and discolored by the extreme heat. The Grand Apadana, the audience hall of Darius and Xerxes, with its forest of columns, was consumed. The Hall of 100 Columns, the largest structure on the terrace, was also gutted by the flames. The destruction was not limited to the grand halls. The treasury was also set on fire after being thoroughly looted of its vast wealth, which was melted down and carted away to fund Alexander's ongoing campaigns. An ironic consequence of the conflagration was the preservation of the Persepolis fortification archive. The thousands of administrative clay tablets, which documented the economic and social workings of the empire, were baked hard by the fire, ensuring their survival for millennia. While the burning of Persepolis served Alexander's immediate political purpose of eradicating a symbol of the old regime, it represented an incalculable loss of cultural heritage, destroying masterpieces of Achaemenid art and architecture. Some later sources claim Alexander came to regret the act, recognizing it as a needless act of destruction unbecoming of his aspirations as a wise ruler. Following Alexander's death in 323 BCE, his vast empire was fractured by the Wars of the Diadochi, a series of conflicts among his generals. From this turmoil, Seleucus I Nicator emerged as the master of the Eastern territories, formally establishing the Seleucid Empire around 312 BCE. His domain, stretching from Anatolia to the Indus Valley, incorporated the entirety of the former Achaemenid heartland. To govern this immense and diverse territory, the Seleucids implemented a policy of strategic colonization, founding numerous new cities and military colonies populated by Greek and Macedonian settlers. The most significant of these was Seleucia on the Tigris, which replaced Babylon as the region's primary administrative and commercial hub. These urban centers, designed on the Greek polis model with gymnasia, theatres and agoras, served as instruments of Hellenization and control, projecting Greek culture and political power deep into the Iranian plateau. The administration of the empire largely continued the Achaemenid satrapy system, but key positions were almost exclusively granted to members of the Greek Macedonian elite. Koine Greek became the official language of government and commerce, creating a linguistic and cultural divide between the ruling class and the native Persian-speaking population. Economically, the Seleucids introduced a standardized Hellenistic-style coinage, replacing the Achaemenid daric and siglos, which facilitated trade across their vast realm and integrated the Iranian economy more fully into the wider Mediterranean world. This period saw a significant cultural syncretism where Greek artistic styles, philosophical ideas, and religious practices began to blend with ancient Persian traditions. However, Seleucid rule was a veneer laid over a resilient Iranian culture. The new cities were islands of Hellenism in a sea of native tradition, and outside of these urban enclaves, life continued much as it had for centuries. The Seleucid military, based on the Macedonian model of the phalanx and heavy cavalry, was constantly engaged in suppressing rebellions and defending the empire's long, porous frontiers. The dynasty faced persistent challenges, notably from the Ptolemies of Egypt in the west and the Mauryan Empire in India, to whom Seleucus I significant eastern territories. The vastness of the Iranian plateau made direct control difficult, and over time, local Iranian satraps and nomadic groups began to reassert their autonomy, setting the stage for the eventual fragmentation of Seleucid authority in Persia. The decline of Seleucid authority in the east created a power vacuum that was exploited by the Pani, a semi-nomadic East Iranian tribe belonging to the Dahai Confederation from the Central Asian steppes. Around 247 BCE, under the leadership of their chieftain, Arsaces I, the Pani invaded the satrapy of Parthia. They capitalized on the internal turmoil of the Seleucid Empire, which was preoccupied with the Third Syrian War against Ptolemaic Egypt. The Pani invasion targeted the local satrap, Andragoras, who had himself rebelled against Seleucid rule a few years prior, making the province an isolated and vulnerable target. Arsaces I successfully overthrew and killed Andragoras, establishing his own rule and founding the Arsacid dynasty, which would govern for nearly 5 centuries. The initial Arsacid state was a small kingdom, not a vast empire, and spent its early decades consolidating power against persistent Seleucid attempts at reconquest. Arsaces' immediate successors were forced to contend with major counteroffensives, most notably from Antiochus III the Great, who temporarily re-established Seleucid suzerainty over the region. The key to Parthian success and eventual expansion was their innovative military doctrine, a direct import from their steppe origins. The Parthian army eschewed the dense infantry phalanxes of their Hellenistic adversaries in favor of a cavalry-centric force. This army was composed of 2 main elements: lightly armored but highly mobile horse archers, and the cataphracts, a devastatingly effective heavy cavalry in which both rider and horse were fully encased in scale or mail armor. The horse archers were masters of harassment tactics, peppering enemy formations with arrows from a distance. Their most famous tactic was the Parthian shot, a maneuver where they would feign retreat, then turn in their saddles to fire upon their pursuers. This combination of mobility and firepower proved exceptionally effective against the slower, more rigid formations of the Seleucids. Culturally, the Arsacids initiated a gradual revival of Iranian traditions as a means of legitimizing their rule. While early Parthian rulers used Hellenistic-style coinage and titles, they increasingly adopted Achaemenid symbolism, eventually taking the title King of Kings. This positioned them not as foreign invaders, but as the rightful heirs to the Persian legacy. The true expansion of Parthian power began under Mithridates I in the mid-1st century BCE. He transformed the Arsacid kingdom into a major empire by conquering Media and, crucially, Mesopotamia from the faltering Seleucids, thereby establishing the Parthians as the dominant power in the Near East and setting the stage for their long rivalry with Rome. The reign of Mithridates I, beginning around 171 BCE, marked the pivotal transformation of the Arsacid kingdom into a formidable empire. Inheriting a state still largely confined to the Parthian heartland, Mithridates capitalized on the terminal decline of the Seleucid Empire, which was hemorrhaging territory and consumed by internal dynastic struggles. His first major strategic objective was the conquest of Media, a large and wealthy region in western Iran. Around 148 BCE, he successfully wrested control of Media, including its capital Ecbatana, from the Seleucids. This victory was not only a significant territorial gain but also a symbolic one, as Ecbatana had been the capital of the ancient Median Empire, further cementing the Arsacid claim as restorers of Iranian sovereignty. With Media secured, Mithridates turned his attention to the ultimate prize, Mesopotamia. The region, with its ancient cities, fertile lands, and control over vital trade routes, was the economic and administrative core of the Seleucid East. In 141 BCE, the Parthian army marched into Mesopotamia and captured the great city of Seleucia on the Tigris, one of the most important centers of Hellenistic culture and commerce. Shortly thereafter, Babylon also fell under Parthian control. The conquest of Mesopotamia was a watershed moment, effectively dislodging the Seleucids from their eastern power base and transferring control of the westernmost sections of the Silk Road to the Arsacids. This provided the Parthian state with immense wealth and prestige. To manage his new, diverse empire, Mithridates adopted a pragmatic and syncretic approach to governance. On his coinage, he styled himself Philhellene, friend of the Greeks, to placate the substantial Greek-speaking urban populations of cities like Seleucia. Simultaneously, he was the first Arsacid ruler to adopt the Achaemenid title King of Kings, Shahanshah, explicitly linking his dynasty to the legacy of Cyrus and Darius, and appealing to his Iranian subjects. The Seleucids did not relinquish Mesopotamia without a fight. In 140 BCE, the Seleucid king Demetrius II Nicator launched a major counteroffensive. Initially successful, the campaign ended in disaster, in 138 BCE, when Demetrius was defeated and captured by Mithridates' forces. The capture of a reigning Seleucid monarch was a catastrophic blow to Hellenistic prestige and solidified Parthian control over Mesopotamia. By the end of his reign, Mithridates I had extended Parthian dominion from the Hindu Kush to the Euphrates, laying the foundations for an empire that would stand as Rome's equal in the East for centuries. With Mesopotamia firmly under their control, the Parthian Empire was geographically positioned to become the crucial intermediary on the burgeoning network of trade routes connecting the Roman Empire in the west with Han Dynasty China in the east. The Arsacid rulers astutely recognized the immense economic and strategic value of this position, and their policy shifted to the careful management of what would become known as the Silk Road. Parthian merchants themselves rarely traveled the entire length of the route. Instead, the empire functioned as a gatekeeper, levying substantial customs duties on the caravans that passed through its territory. Cities like Ctesiphon, founded near Seleucia, and the older capital of Hekatompelos, grew into cosmopolitan centers of commerce where goods from both ends of the known world were exchanged. Silk from China, spices from India, and gemstones from the East were traded for Roman glass, textiles, and metals. This control of transcontinental trade became a primary source of revenue for the Arsacid state, funding its administration and, most importantly, its military. The Parthians also acted as a deliberate buffer, preventing direct diplomatic and commercial contact between Rome and China, which maximized their leverage and ensured their continued indispensability. This economic power was sustained by a unique and formidable military system. The term Parthian arch refers not to architecture, but to the powerful composite bow that was the cornerstone of their tactical doctrine. Constructed from laminated layers of wood, horn, and sinew, this weapon possessed a range and penetrating power far superior to the simpler bows used by their Roman and Hellenistic contemporaries. This technological advantage was maximized by their army's composition, which consisted almost entirely of cavalry. The bulk of the force was made up of lightly armored horse archers who could shower an enemy with arrows from a safe distance, retreating swiftly if threatened. Their signature tactic, the Parthian shot, involved feigning a retreat to lure enemies into a disorganized pursuit, only to have the archers turn in their saddles and fire devastating volleys into the chasing ranks. Once the enemy formation was weakened, disordered, and demoralized by this relentless harassment, the second component of the Parthian army, the cataphracts, would deliver the decisive blow. These heavily armored shock cavalry, with both horse and rider clad in metal scales, would charge with their long lances kontos to shatter the broken enemy lines. This potent combination of mobile firepower and armored shock tactics, funded by the wealth of the Silk Road, made the Parthian Empire a military superpower that even the legions of Rome found nearly impossible to defeat. The Parthian Empire's expansion to the Euphrates River in the Honest century BCE made a direct confrontation with the burgeoning power of Rome inevitable. The first formal diplomatic contact occurred in 96 BCE, establishing the river as a de facto border, but this was a prelude to conflict, not a guarantee of peace. The first major clash came in 53 BCE, when Marcus Licinius Crassus, a member of the First Triumvirate and the wealthiest man in Rome, launched an unprovoked invasion of Parthian Mesopotamia. Seeking military glory to rival his partners, Pompey and Caesar, Crassus led an army of 7 legions, approximately 40,000 men, into a disastrous campaign. He severely underestimated his enemy, expecting a swift victory over what he perceived as a decadent eastern kingdom. Near the town of Carrhae, his army was met by a much smaller Parthian force under the command of the brilliant general Chaerenae. The open, arid terrain was perfectly suited for the Parthian cavalry. Chaerenae's horse archers encircled the Roman heavy infantry, who formed a defensive square, and subjected them to a relentless barrage of arrows. The Roman shields and armor were not designed to withstand the penetrating power of the Parthian composite bows. When the legionaries attempted to charge, the horse archers would simply retreat, firing their famous Parthian shot as they withdrew. Murena had also organized a logistical train of camels carrying a massive reserve of arrows, allowing his forces to maintain their fire for hours. Once the legions were weakened and demoralized, Murena's cataphracts charged, shattering the Roman formations. The battle was a complete catastrophe for Rome. Crassus and his son were killed, and the majority of his army was annihilated. In a profound humiliation, the Parthians captured the legionary eagles, the sacred standards of the Roman army. The Battle of Carrhae established Parthia as a military superpower and demonstrated the vulnerability of Roman legions to cavalry-based tactics. The defeat was followed by Parthian counter-invasions into Roman Syria. 2 decades later, in 36 BCE, Mark Antony attempted to avenge Crassus with another massive invasion. Despite assembling an even larger army, Antony's campaign also ended in a costly failure, with his forces suffering devastating losses during a long retreat, harassed constantly by Parthian cavalry. These repeated Roman disasters solidified the Euphrates as a heavily militarized and contested frontier, beginning a centuries-long struggle between the two great powers of the age. The foundation of Ctesiphon on the eastern bank of the Tigris River was a deliberate strategic choice by the Arsacid rulers. Situated directly opposite the great Hellenistic metropolis of Seleucia, it began not as a grand city, but likely as a military encampment, a seasonal residence for the Parthian court. This location offered a distinct advantage, allowing the Arsacids to project power and oversee the affairs of Mesopotamia without being confined within the rigid Greek urban plan of Seleucia. The Parthian leadership, retaining some of the nomadic customs of their ancestors, practiced a form of seasonal migration. They would spend the hot summer months in the cooler air of their traditional capitals on the Iranian plateau, such as Ecbatana and Hecatompylos. As winter approached, the court would move to the warmer, fertile lowlands of Mesopotamia, with Ctesiphon becoming the preeminent winter capital. Over time, what started as a temporary settlement evolved into a sprawling royal city. By the 1st century CE, classical geographers like Strabo explicitly identified it as the primary winter residence of the Parthian kings. Unlike Greco-Roman cities, Ctesiphon grew organically, likely lacking a formal grid system, and instead consisting of a collection of royal palaces, administrative buildings, noble residences, and barracks forming a vast royal complex. This strategic placement on the Tigris also integrated it directly into the major east-west trade arteries. Ctesiphon's growth mirrored its increasing importance as a hub where goods flowing from the eastern provinces could be consolidated before entering Roman-controlled territories. Its population became a cosmopolitan mix of Persians, Greeks, Babylonians, and Arameans. However, its proximity to the Roman frontier made it the ultimate prize in the ongoing wars between the two empires. The city became a primary military objective for any Roman emperor seeking to claim a definitive victory over Parthia. Consequently, Ctesiphon endured multiple captures. The Emperor Trajan sacked the city in 116 CE, even capturing the Golden Throne of the Parthian king. Decades later, in 165 CE, the Roman general Avidius Cassius burned the royal palace to the ground. In 198 CE, Septimius Severus mounted another successful invasion, sacking the capital and enslaving a significant portion of its population. Yet, despite these repeated devastations, Ctesiphon always remained Parthian. The Romans could capture the city, but their extended supply lines made it impossible to hold permanently. The Parthians would simply retreat deeper into Iran, allowing the logistical challenges to defeat the legions, and then retake their capital once the invaders had withdrawn. The Parthian Empire's eventual collapse was the result of long-term structural weaknesses as much as external pressure. The Arsacid state was never a centralized bureaucracy in the Roman or Achaemenid sense. It was a feudal-like confederation. Real power was distributed between the king of kings and a handful of powerful noble families, or great houses, such as the Shuran, the Karen, and the Isbabudin. These clans controlled vast hereditary lands, fielded their own private armies, and held key positions in the royal council. Their loyalty was often conditional, and they frequently backed rival claimants to the Arsacid throne, plunging the empire into debilitating civil wars. The issue of succession was a constant source of instability. The Arsacids did not practice strict primogeniture, meaning the death of a king often triggered a violent power struggle among his sons, brothers, and uncles. These internal conflicts, which became increasingly frequent and severe from the 1st century CE onwards, drained the treasury and military manpower, leaving the western frontier vulnerable at critical moments. The Roman threat was persistent and evolved over time. While early invasions under Crassus and Antony had ended in disaster for Rome, later emperors learned from these mistakes. Roman military strategy shifted towards more punitive, large-scale raids, aimed at sacking major cities, especially the capital, Ctesiphon, rather than attempting permanent conquest. These campaigns, while not resulting in lasting territorial gains for Rome, were devastating for the Parthians. The repeated destruction of their capital undermined the prestige of the Arsacid king and inflicted severe economic damage, disrupting trade and requiring vast resources for rebuilding. The reign of Vologases I in the mid-Honest century CE marked a period of attempted centralization and cultural revival, but it was followed by renewed internal strife. The final century of Parthian rule was characterized by almost constant civil war, compounded by nomadic incursions on the northeastern frontier and the outbreak of a devastating plague that swept through the empire in the 160s CE. The last major war with Rome, initiated by Emperor Caracalla in 216 CE, proved to be the final strain. The Parthian king Artabanus IV managed to fight the Romans to a costly stalemate, but the conflict exhausted the empire's last military and economic reserves. This state of profound weakness created an opportunity for a vassal king from the province of Persis, Ardashir I, to launch a rebellion that would ultimately topple the Arsacid dynasty and establish a new Persian empire. The foundation of the Sasanian Empire was the work of Ardashir I, a local Persian ruler from the province of Persis, the Achaemenid heartland. He was the son of Papak and the grandson of Sasan, a priest at the temple of Anahita in Istakhr, from whom the dynasty took its name. Capitalizing on the endemic civil wars and the exhaustion of the Arsacid regime following its final conflict with Rome, Ardashir began consolidating his power around 208 CE. He systematically overthrew the other local princes of Persis and expanded his control over neighboring provinces like Kerman and Isfahan. This direct challenge to the authority of the Parthian central government could not be ignored. The final confrontation came in 224 CE at the Battle of Hormozgan. The exact location is debated, but it was there that Ardashir's forces met the army of the last great Parthian king, Artabanus IV. In the ensuing battle, Artabanus was defeated and killed, effectively ending nearly 5 centuries of Arsacid rule. 2 years later, in 226 CE, Ardashir was crowned in Ctesiphon as Shahanshah, or King of Kings, deliberately reviving the grand title of his Achaemenid predecessors. The new Sasanian state was founded on an ideology of restoration and centralization. Ardashir presented himself not merely as a new ruler, but as the restorer of a glorious Persian past that had been diluted by the Hellenistic influences tolerated by the Parthians. He consciously sought to create a political and cultural continuity with the Achaemenid Empire. A key pillar of this new state was the elevation of Zoroastrianism. Under Ardashir, the religion was transformed into a structured, hierarchical state church, a process that would be continued by his successors. He empowered the Zoroastrian priesthood, the Magi, granting them vast estates and integrating them into the state bureaucracy. This created a powerful alliance between the throne and the altar, where the state legitimized the church, and the church sanctified the rule of the king. Politically, Ardashir moved to dismantle the semi-independent power of the great Parthian noble families. He initiated a policy of creating a more centralized administration and a standing army directly loyal to the crown, funded by a reformed system of taxation. This marked a fundamental shift away from the feudal-like structure of the Arsacid Confederation. By forging a new Persian identity based on centralized authority and religious orthodoxy, Ardashir I laid the groundwork for an empire that would stand as Rome's equal for the next 4 centuries. The Sasanian concept of kingship represented a profound ideological break from their Arsacid predecessors. Central to this was the Zoroastrian notion of Kavarina, a divine glory or sacred fortune bestowed by Ahura Mazda upon a legitimate ruler. This was not a new idea, but the Sasanians systematically appropriated it, arguing that this divine grace was exclusive to their dynasty. The king was therefore not merely a successful warlord, but the chosen earthly instrument of God, tasked with maintaining cosmic order and combating the forces of chaos. This ideal of divine monarchy was relentlessly promoted through a sophisticated program of state propaganda. Sasanian kings commissioned massive rock reliefs at sites like Nakshi Rostam and Bishapur, carving their legitimacy directly into the landscape. These reliefs often depicted investiture scenes, where the king is shown on horseback receiving the diadem, or ring of power, directly from a deity, usually Ahura Mazda. This imagery provided a clear and powerful visual statement. The king's authority came not from noble consensus or military might alone, but from a divine mandate. Coinage served as another mobile form of this propaganda. Sasanian silver drachms, which circulated throughout the empire and beyond, featured a distinctive design. The obverse carried a portrait of the reigning Shahanshah, each identifiable by a unique and elaborate crown, emphasizing his individual majesty. The reverse typically depicted a Zoroastrian fire altar, often flanked by 2 attendants, explicitly linking the monarch to the state religion. This constant visual association reinforced the king's role as the supreme protector of the true faith. Unlike the deified rulers of some Hellenistic kingdoms, the Sasanian King of Kings was not considered a god himself, but rather God's vicegerent on earth. His actions were seen as a reflection of the cosmic struggle between good and evil. A just and successful reign brought prosperity, which was evidence of divine favor, while defeat or internal chaos could be interpreted as a loss of Kavarina. This ideology was further reinforced by elaborate court ceremonials that created an aura of inaccessibility around the monarch, elevating him far above even the highest nobility. This divinely sanctioned absolutism stood in stark contrast to the Parthian model of a first among equals, and defined the Sasanian state for its entire existence. Shapur-Thruth, the son and successor of Ardashir, inherited a newly forged empire and a mission to solidify its position against its Roman rival. His reign would elevate the Sasanian state to a new height of power, culminating in an event unprecedented in the long history of Roman warfare. Shapur launched his first major campaigns against Rome in the 240s CE, exploiting the political chaos of the empire's 3rd century crisis. He pushed deep into Roman Mesopotamia and Syria, sacking the great city of Antioch in 253 CE, and deporting a significant portion of its skilled population to his new royal city, Bishapur. This policy of mass deportation became a hallmark of his reign, transferring valuable human capital artisans, engineers, and scholars from Roman territories to Persia, where they contributed to major construction and infrastructure projects, including the Shushtar hydraulic system. The escalating Sasanian threat prompted a direct response from the Roman Emperor Valerian. In the late 250s, he assembled one of the largest Roman field armies of the century, numbering some 70,000 men, and marched east to restore Roman authority. The decisive confrontation occurred in 260 CE near the city of Edessa. The battle was not a single pitched engagement, but a strategic masterpiece by Shapur. Using his elite Savaran heavy cavalry and mobile horse archers, he encircled the Roman army, cutting off its supply lines and subjecting it to constant harassing attacks. Trapped, starving, and ravaged by plague, Valerian's position became untenable. In a desperate attempt to negotiate a truce, Valerian and his senior staff went to meet Shapur, where they were seized and taken captive. The capture of a reigning Roman emperor was a psychological and political shockwave that reverberated across the ancient world. No emperor had ever suffered such a fate. Shapur immortalized his triumph in a series of monumental rock reliefs, most famously at Nakhchi Rostam. There, a colossal carving shows Shapur on horseback, while the Roman emperor kneels before him in submission, a potent and enduring image of Sasanian supremacy. While Sasanian sources focus on the glory of the victory, Roman accounts detail Valerian's profound humiliation, claiming he was used as a human footstool for Shapur to mount his horse. After his death in captivity, his skin was allegedly flayed, stuffed with straw, and displayed in a Zoroastrian temple as a permanent symbol of Rome's defeat. This singular event established the Sasanian Empire as the undisputed equal of Rome, a superpower whose military prowess could bring the Caesars themselves to their knees. The Sasanian elevation of Zoroastrianism was a systematic project of religious centralization, moving far beyond the patronage of their Arsacid predecessors. This transformation was driven by powerful figures within the priesthood, most notably the high priest Kartir. Active during the reigns of several early Shahanshahs, Kartir left a series of rock inscriptions detailing his lifelong mission to create a unified Orthodox Zoroastrian church. He describes his rise through the priestly ranks and his efforts to establish fire temples, standardize rituals, and purify the faith. Central to this project was the transition of the Avesta, the sacred texts of Zoroastrianism, from a largely oral tradition into a codified, written canon. This process, likely beginning under Ardashir I and continuing for generations, was a monumental scholarly undertaking. It involved collecting scattered oral traditions, fixing a standardized version of the sacred language, and committing the liturgy and doctrines to writing. The creation of a single authoritative scripture allowed the state to define orthodoxy and, consequently, heresy. The establishment of a formal religious hierarchy was another cornerstone of the Sasanian policy. A chief priest, the Mobedan Mobed, was instituted, creating a religious authority parallel to the King of Kings himself. This figure presided over a structured clergy of magi who were integrated into the imperial administration, serving as judges, educators, and civil servants. This institutionalization gave the state immense control over religious life and provided a powerful ideological tool for unifying a diverse empire. The drive for religious uniformity inevitably led to the persecution of other faiths. Kartir's inscriptions explicitly state his intolerance for competing religions, boasting that he smote the doctrines of Jews, Buddhists, Christians, and Manichaeans. The new faith of Manichaeism, which had emerged during the reign of Shapur I and blended elements of Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and Buddhism, was a particular target. Its prophet Mani was executed, and his followers were systematically suppressed. This policy of enforced orthodoxy solidified the relationship between the Sasanian monarchy and the Zoroastrian church, creating an inseparable bond that defined the empire's identity and legitimized its rule for the next 4 centuries. Amidst the religious consolidation of the Sasanian Empire, a new and powerful faith emerged from the diverse intellectual landscape of Mesopotamia. Its founder, Mani, was born in 216 CE near Ctesiphon into a Judeo-Christian Baptist sect. This environment exposed him from a young age to a rich tapestry of religious ideas. Mani claimed to have received his first divine revelation at the age of 12 and a second at 24, which commanded him to preach a new universal religion. His teachings were a deliberate and sophisticated synthesis of the major faiths of his time. At its core, Manichaeism was a radically dualistic Gnostic faith, positing a primal conflict between a spiritual kingdom of light, ruled by the Father of Greatness, and a material kingdom of darkness, ruled by the Prince of Darkness. According to his cosmology, the material world was a prison created by the forces of darkness to trap particles of divine light that had been stolen during a cosmic battle. The purpose of human existence was to liberate these trapped light particles through ascetic practices and the acquisition of spiritual knowledge, or gnosis. Mani saw himself as the final prophet in a long succession that included Zoroaster, the Buddha, and Jesus, arguing that their original messages had been corrupted over time. He intended his religion to be the final, complete revelation, suitable for all humanity. This universalist ambition was reflected in the structure of his church, which was highly organized with a strict hierarchy of elect and hearers, and a body of written scripture composed by Mani himself. Initially, Mani found a receptive patron in Shahanshah Shapur I. The prophet dedicated one of his major works, the Shaburagan, to the king, and was permitted to preach and establish communities throughout the Sasanian Empire. Shapur's tolerance may have stemmed from the potential utility of a universal religion that could unify the diverse peoples within his vast conquests. For several decades, Manichaeism flourished, its missionaries traveling east along the Silk Road into Central Asia and west into the Roman Empire. However, its success was its undoing. The highly organized and orthodox Zoroastrian clergy, led by the high priest Kartir, viewed Manichaeism not as a complementary faith, but as a dangerous heresy. Following Shapur's death, the political climate shifted. Under Bahram I, who was heavily influenced by Kartir, the state's tolerance ended. Mani was arrested, subjected to a theological debate he was destined to lose, and died in prison around 274 CE. Despite this persecution in its homeland, the religion of light would endure for another 1,000 years, becoming a major world faith that challenged both Roman Christianity and Chinese Buddhism. The reign of Khosrow I, known as Anushirvan or of the Immortal Soul, represents the apex of Sasanian power and is widely considered a golden age in Persian history. Ascending to the throne in 531 CE in the tumultuous aftermath of the Mazdakite rebellions, Khosrow embarked on a series of profound reforms that fundamentally reshaped the Sasanian state. His most significant achievement was a comprehensive overhaul of the imperial tax system. He replaced the traditional tax, which was based on a variable percentage of the harvest, with a fixed land tax calculated from a meticulous survey of all cultivated land, palm groves, and olive orchards. This reform provided the state with a stable, predictable annual income, independent of agricultural fluctuations, and allowed for long-term fiscal planning. Alongside this, he instituted a new poll tax, a fixed annual payment for individuals, further rationalizing state revenue. Khosrow also professionalized the military, breaking the power of the great feudal lords who had previously supplied private armies. He created a new class of lesser nobility, the Dekhans, who were endowed with land and equipment by the crown and served as the backbone of a new, state-paid standing army. To improve command and control, he divided the empire into 4 military quadrants, each commanded by a general, or Spab, who reported directly to him. This created a more loyal, efficient, and centralized military machine. His reign was also a period of extraordinary intellectual flourishing. The Academy of Gondishapur, already a center of learning, rose to become the preeminent intellectual hub of its time. When the Byzantine Emperor Justinian closed the Neoplatonist Academy in Athens in 529 CE, Khosrow famously welcomed the exiled Greek philosophers to his court. He sponsored a massive translation movement, commissioning scholars to render important works of Greek philosophy, Indian medicine, and astronomy into the Pahlavi language. In foreign affairs, he engaged in a long and largely successful series of wars against the Byzantine Empire, sacking the great city of Antioch in 540 CE. The eventual Eternal Peace Treaty of 562 CE compelled Byzantium to pay a substantial annual tribute in gold, a clear acknowledgement of Sasanian military dominance. Through these administrative, military, and intellectual achievements, Khosrow I elevated his empire to its zenith, earning his title and securing a legacy as one of Persia's greatest rulers. While Khosrow I's patronage marked its zenith, the Academy of Gondishapur was a centuries-long Sasanian project, founded in the 3rd century CE by Shapur I. It evolved into the most significant intellectual center of its time by systematically fusing disparate streams of knowledge into a unique, multicultural institution. The Academy's growth was significantly accelerated by the influx of Nestorian Christian scholars fleeing persecution in the Byzantine Empire, particularly after the closure of the school of Edessa in 489 CE. These scholars brought with them an advanced curriculum based on Greek medicine and philosophy, translating the works of Hippocrates, Galen, and Aristotle into Syriac, which served as the Academy's primary scholarly language. This Greek foundation was then integrated with medical and mathematical knowledge from India. Sasanian diplomatic missions to India returned with physicians and texts, introducing concepts from Ayurvedic medicine, including pharmacology and novel surgical techniques. These were studied alongside Persian medical traditions rooted in the Avesta. The most revolutionary feature of Gondishapur was its hospital, or Bimaristan, which is considered by many historians to be the world's first teaching hospital. Here, medical theory was directly linked to clinical practice. Physicians treated patients from across the empire while students observed and participated, a pedagogical model that would not become common in Europe for nearly a millennium. The Academy also housed a major astronomical observatory, which compiled and corrected astronomical tables, and a vast library that was the heart of the translation movement. Scholars at Gondishapur were not merely preserving ancient knowledge, they were actively expanding upon it, writing commentaries and producing new scientific and philosophical works. This synthesis of Greek, Indian, Syriac, and Persian learning created an unparalleled intellectual environment. When the Islamic Caliphate conquered Persia, the Academy's legacy was not destroyed, but absorbed. The early Abbasid caliphs, particularly al-Mansur, actively recruited scholars from Gondishapur to establish the intellectual foundations of Baghdad, directly influencing the creation of the famous House of Wisdom and seeding the Islamic Golden Age with its vast repository of knowledge. While Sasanian military doctrine often emphasized mobile heavy cavalry, the empire also invested in monumental static defenses to secure its vulnerable frontiers. The most impressive of these was the Great Wall of Gorgan, a massive defensive system located southeast of the Caspian Sea, engineered to protect the fertile heartlands of Persia from the incursions of nomadic peoples from the Central Asian steppes. Often referred to as the Red Snake due to the distinctive color of its millions of fired bricks, this fortification was a testament to the immense logistical and engineering capabilities of the Sasanian state. Constructed primarily during the 5th and early 6th centuries CE, its development is associated with the reigns of Yazdegerd II and Khosrow I, a period of intense conflict with the Hephthalites, or White Huns. The wall was not merely a barrier, but an integrated military complex. It stretched for nearly 200 kilometers, featured a deep ditch on its northern side, and was punctuated by a series of over 38 forts, spaced at regular intervals. These forts were substantial military installations, capable of housing large garrisons and serving as bases for patrols and counteroffensives. The scale of the project was enormous, surpassing even Hadrian's Wall in length and complexity. Archaeological investigations have revealed the sophistication of its construction. Millions of standardized kiln-fired bricks were produced on-site in a string of purpose-built kilns erected along the wall's path. A major canal system was constructed parallel to the wall, serving multiple functions. It provided water for the garrisons, and the brick-making process served as an additional defensive moat, and controlled water flow for the agricultural lands the wall was built to protect. Manning such a defense line required a permanent standing army, estimated to be as large as 30 soldiers. This massive investment of manpower and resources underscores the severity of the threat posed by the northern nomads and the Sasanian commitment to a forward defense strategy. The Gorgan Wall was a clear demarcation of imperial territory, a physical manifestation of Sasanian power designed to control movement, channel trade, and project an image of permanent, unchallengeable authority over a contested and vital frontier. The final climactic conflict between the Byzantine and Sasanian empires, fought from 602 to 628 CE, was the longest and most devastating of their centuries-long rivalry. The war was triggered when the Sasanian king Khosrow II used the overthrow and murder of his benefactor, the Byzantine Emperor Maurice, by the usurper Phocas as a pretext to launch a full-scale invasion. The initial phase of the war was an almost unbroken series of Sasanian victories. Persian armies under brilliant generals like Shahrbaraz and Shahin systematically conquered Byzantine Mesopotamia, Armenia, and then pushed deep into the empire's core territories. They captured Antioch in 611, Damascus in 613, and in 614 achieved a major symbolic and psychological victory by sacking Jerusalem, massacring much of its Christian population and carrying away the true cross. By 619, Persian forces had conquered Egypt, the breadbasket of the Byzantine Empire, cutting off Constantinople's vital grain supply. The Byzantine state was on the verge of total collapse. The situation was reversed by the ascension of Emperor Heraclius in 610, who spent a decade consolidating his power before launching a daring counteroffensive. In 622, instead of attempting to reconquer the lost provinces directly, Heraclius took his army by sea to the Black Sea coast and struck deep into the Sasanian rear in Armenia and Anatolia, forcing the Persians to withdraw troops from the front lines. The climax of the war came in 626, when a combined Sasanian and Avar army laid siege to Constantinople itself. The formidable Theodosian walls and the superiority of the Byzantine navy repulsed the assault, a critical turning point. Heraclius, meanwhile, continued his campaign in the Persian heartland, culminating in a decisive victory at the Battle of Nineveh in late 627. This defeat shattered the Sasanian army and led to a coup in which Khosrow II was overthrown and killed. The subsequent treaty restored all conquered territories to the Byzantines and returned the true cross. However, both empires were left utterly exhausted financially and militarily, their manpower depleted, and their social structures fractured. This mutual ruin created a power vacuum that left them fatally vulnerable to the nascent Arab armies emerging from the Arabian Peninsula, who would, within a decade, permanently overwhelm the Sasanian Empire and strip Byzantium of its eastern provinces. Khosrow II's initial campaigns were not merely acts of retribution for the death of Emperor Maurice. They were the culmination of a Sasanian grand strategy aimed at permanently crippling the Byzantine Empire and restoring Persian dominion over the Near East. The capture of Jerusalem in 614 CE was the ideological centerpiece of this ambition. More than a strategic military objective, the city represented the heart of the rival Christian faith. The Sasanian general Shahrbaraz did not just conquer Jerusalem, he conducted a systematic dismantling of its Christian identity. Churches were looted and burned, and a significant portion of the Christian population was either massacred or deported. The primary prize, however, was the true cross, the most sacred relic in Christendom. Its removal from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and transportation back to Ctesiphon was a calculated act of political and religious theatre. For Khosrow II, possessing the cross was the ultimate symbol of his triumph. It was paraded as proof of the superiority of Zoroastrianism and the power of the Shahanshah over the Christian emperor and his god. This act was intended to demoralize the Byzantine populace and shatter the ideological foundation of their empire, which was intrinsically linked to its role as the protector of Christianity. The victory, however, was profoundly Pyrrhic. By seizing the true cross, Khosrow transformed a dynastic war of territorial expansion into a holy war. Emperor Heraclius, facing the imminent collapse of his state, successfully reframed the conflict as a crusade to liberate Christian lands and recover the sacred relic. This galvanized a level of popular support and religious fervor that had been absent in earlier phases of the conflict. The war effort was funded by the melting down of church silver, a sacrifice the Byzantine population willingly made for a sacred cause. Khosrow, blinded by his unprecedented successes, became intransigent. He rejected multiple peace overtures from Heraclius, demanding unconditional surrender. This refusal to negotiate, bolstered by the immense prestige gained from holding the cross, locked the Sasanian Empire into a protracted conflict that it could not sustain. The vast new territories in Egypt, the Levant, and Anatolia were difficult to administer and garrison, draining the treasury and overstretching military resources. The long war necessitated crushing taxes on the Persian population, fostering deep resentment and eroding the very stability Khosrow's victories were meant to secure. The final victory belonged to Heraclius, but the greatest cost was borne by the Sasanian state, which had exhausted its wealth and manpower in pursuit of a triumph that ultimately triggered its own destruction. The mutual exhaustion of the Byzantine and Sasanian empires created a geopolitical vacuum that was filled by an unforeseen force emerging from the Arabian Peninsula. Unified under the banner of Islam, the armies of the Rashidun Caliphate possessed a cohesion, mobility, and ideological fervor that the fractured and depleted Sasanian state was unprepared to confront. The initial Arab incursions into Sasanian Mesopotamia in the early 630s were dismissed by the court at Ctesiphon as little more than nomadic raids, a persistent but manageable frontier problem. This profound underestimation of the threat proved to be a fatal miscalculation. The turning point in the conflict was the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah in 636 CE. The Sasanian general Rostam Farrukhzad commanded a large, traditionally organized imperial army, complete with cataphract heavy cavalry and a corps of war elephants. Facing him was a smaller but highly motivated Arab force under Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. The battle, fought over several days, neutralized the Sasanian advantages. Arab infantry armed with long lances effectively countered the cavalry charges, while their archers targeted the eyes of the elephants, causing them to panic and disrupt their own lines. The death of Rostam during the chaotic fighting shattered the Sasanian command structure and morale, leading to a total collapse of their army. The defeat at Al-Qadisiyah was catastrophic. It left the road to the capital undefended. Shortly after, Arab forces captured Ctesiphon, seizing the legendary treasury of the Sasanian kings and effectively decapitating the imperial administration. A final desperate attempt to rally the remaining Persian forces was made by Emperor Yazdegerd III, culminating in the Battle of Nahavand in 642 CE. Known to Arab historians as the Victory of Victories, this engagement annihilated the last major Sasanian field army. The imperial structure, which had endured for over 4 centuries, disintegrated with astonishing speed. Yazdegerd III spent the last decade of his life as a fugitive in the eastern provinces before being assassinated in 651, bringing the Sasanian dynasty to a definitive end. The conquest was complete, replacing a millennium of Zoroastrian Iranian rule with the new order of the Islamic Caliphate. The Sasanian army assembled at Al-Qadisiyah represented the full might of the empire, a force meticulously organized according to centuries of military tradition. At its core were the Savaran, the elite cataphract heavy cavalry, encased in lamella armor and wielding lances and heavy maces. This armored fist was supported by a large body of pagan infantry, composed of conscripts and levies, and critically, a specialized corps of war elephants, intended to smash through enemy formations and create terror. The command of this formidable host fell to Rostam Farrukhzad, the most senior general of the Sasanian state. Opposing him was a significantly smaller Arab Muslim army led by Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. His force lacked heavy cavalry and elephants, consisting primarily of highly mobile light cavalry and disciplined infantry. Their key tactical advantage lay in their unit cohesion, unwavering morale, and the flexibility of their commanders in adapting to battlefield conditions. The battle unfolded over 4 grueling days. On the first day, Rostam initiated the fighting with a massive elephant charge aimed at breaking the Arab center. The initial impact was devastating, with the Arab infantry struggling to hold their ground against the immense beasts. The second day saw the arrival of crucial Arab reinforcements from the Syrian front, their timely appearance boosting the morale of Sa'd's army. The Arabs adapted their tactics, specifically targeting the elephants. Warriors were tasked with striking the animals' trunks and eyes, while others cut the girths of the howdahs, unseating the riders. This strategy proved brutally effective, causing the wounded and terrified elephants to rampage back through the Persian lines, sowing chaos and confusion. The third day dissolved into a prolonged and savage nocturnal engagement known as the Night of Clamour, where disciplined formations broke down into a series of desperate, small unit actions fought in the dark. The decisive moment came on the fourth day, when a fierce sandstorm erupted, blowing sand directly into the faces of the Sasanian soldiers. Disoriented and blinded, their command and control collapsed. In the ensuing chaos, Rostam Farrukhzad was killed. His death, the exact circumstances of which are debated, instantly decapitated the Sasanian leadership. The news of his demise spread rapidly through the ranks, and what had been a grinding battle turned into a complete rout. The Sasanian army disintegrated, its soldiers fleeing in a desperate attempt to escape. The Battle of Al-Qadisiyah was not merely a defeat. It was the annihilation of the principal Sasanian field army and the irretrievable loss of Mesopotamia. Following the decisive defeat at Nahavand, the Sasanian state effectively ceased to exist as a coherent political or military entity. For Yazdegerd III, the loss initiated a decade-long period as a fugitive monarch, a king without a kingdom, constantly moving eastward through the remaining provinces of his disintegrating empire. His flight was not a simple retreat, but a desperate and continuous search for a new power base from which to organize a counterattack. From the central Zagros mountains, he moved to Isfahan, then to Kerman, and finally into the vast province of Khorasan, the traditional heartland of Sasanian power and a recruiting ground for its armies. However, his presence often brought more trouble than inspiration to the local governors, or Marsbans. Harbouring the fugitive king invited the direct and relentless pursuit of Arab armies, a risk many local aristocrats were unwilling to take, especially as the prospects of a Sasanian restoration grew increasingly dim. Yazdegerd's attempts to rally support were met with a mixture of fleeting loyalty, cautious pragmatism, and outright betrayal. He appealed for aid from external powers, sending emissaries to the Tang court in China, which recorded his pleas but offered no substantive military assistance. He also sought help from the Turkic tribes of Central Asia, but these alliances proved unreliable and transient. His authority had evaporated. He was a symbol of a lost cause, a king whose royal prestige was overshadowed by his inability to command resources or protect his followers. The final years of his life were spent in the remote northeastern city of Merv. Even there, the local governor proved treacherous, seeking to seize the remnants of the royal treasure. Forced to flee the city, the last Shahanshah of the Sasanian Empire met an ignominious end. In 651 CE, seeking refuge in a miller's hut outside the city, he was murdered by the miller for his purse and royal adornments. The death of Yazdegerd III was not a grand climactic event, but a squalid assassination that underscored the complete collapse of the imperial order he represented. With his death, the Sasanian dynasty, which had ruled for 425 years, was extinguished, and the formal, if protracted, process of Persia's integration into the Islamic world was sealed. The integration of Persia into the Islamic Caliphate was a complex process, marked by two distinct phases of governance under the Umayyad and Abbasid dynasties. Under the Damascus-based Umayyad Caliphate, Persia was treated primarily as a conquered territory. The administration was fundamentally Arab-centric, creating a clear social and political hierarchy. Persian converts to Islam, known as the Mawali, were theoretically brothers in faith, but were often treated as second-class citizens. They were frequently still required to pay the jizya, the poll tax typically levied on non-Muslims, and were largely excluded from the highest echelons of military and political power. The Umayyads retained much of the Sasanian administrative machinery out of necessity, relying on the experienced Persian landowning class, the Daychquans. to manage tax collection and local governance. However, they systematically replaced Middle Persian with Arabic as the official language of the bureaucracy, seeking to centralize and Arabize the state. This combination of fiscal discrimination, social inequality, and cultural imposition fostered deep resentment across the Iranian plateau, particularly in the vast eastern province of Khorasan. This widespread discontent became the primary engine of the Abbasid Revolution. Spearheaded by figures like the Khorasani general Abu Muslim, the revolution drew its strength from a coalition of disgruntled Persians and non-Umayyad Arabs who rallied to the Abbasid banner's promise of a more universal and equitable Islamic empire. The success of the revolution in 750 CE marked a profound shift. The Abbasids moved the capital from Damascus to the newly founded city of Baghdad, strategically located near the old Sasanian capital. This geographical move symbolized a deeper political and cultural reorientation. The Abbasid court became heavily Persianized, adopting Sasanian administrative models, court etiquette, and architectural styles. Powerful Persian families, most notably the Barmakids, rose to prominence, serving as viziers and effectively running the empire's administration for decades. This era witnessed the full integration of Persian culture into the Islamic world, sparking a cultural synthesis that defined the Islamic Golden Age. Persian scholars became central figures in the translation movement, preserving and transmitting knowledge, while the Persian language itself was reborn as New Persian, laying the foundation for a spectacular literary renaissance. The Shu'biya movement emerged not on a battlefield, but in the intellectual salons and literary circles of the early Islamic Empire. It was a profound cultural and intellectual assertion by non-Arab Muslims, primarily Persians, against the lingering currents of Arab political and cultural supremacy. The movement derived its name from a Quranic verse that speaks of humanity being created in nations and tribes, or shu'ub and qaba'il, to know one another, with the most noble in the sight of God being the most righteous. Proponents of Shu'ubiyya seized upon this verse to argue that piety, not ethnicity, was the true measure of a person, and that the cultural achievements of their own people were equal, if not superior, to those of the Arabs. This was not a secessionist movement, but a campaign for cultural parity within the universal house of Islam. Its weapons were poetry, prose, history, and genealogy. Persian scholars and poets systematically compiled and celebrated the glories of their pre-Islamic past. They wrote extensively about the justice of Sasanian kings, the architectural marvels of their cities, and the sophistication of their statecraft. They translated foundational Middle Persian texts such as the Khwade-Namag, or Book of Kings, into Arabic, ensuring that the epic history and foundational myths of Iran were not lost, but instead became part of the intellectual currency of the new empire. This literary effort directly contrasted the rich, ancient, and urbanized history of Persia with what they characterized as the more simplistic, nomadic culture of the pre-Islamic Arabian Peninsula. Figures like Ibn al-Muqaffa were central to this process, acting as cultural bridges who rendered the administrative and literary wisdom of the Sasanian era into elegant Arabic, profoundly influencing Abbasid governance. The Shu'ubiyya was a powerful act of cultural preservation. By championing their heritage, its advocates ensured that the Islamization of Persia did not result in its total Arabization. They laid the intellectual groundwork for the revival of New Persian as a literary language, a process that would culminate in epic works like Ferdowsi's Shahnameh. The movement successfully carved out a distinct Perso-Islamic identity, creating a rich cultural synthesis that permanently shaped the trajectory of civilization in both Iran and the wider Islamic world, proving that a people could adopt a new faith without abandoning the ancient soul of their culture. The culmination of the Persian cultural and linguistic revival found its ultimate expression in the work of a single poet, Abul Qasim Ferdowsi. Working for 3 decades at the turn of the 11th century, he did not invent the national epic of Iran, but gave it its definitive and enduring form. His project was made possible by the political fragmentation of the Abbasid Caliphate and the rise of independent Persian dynasties, particularly the Samanids of Khorasan. The Samanid court actively cultivated a renaissance of Persian culture, commissioning the translation of pre-Islamic texts and patronizing poets who wrote in New Persian. It was in this environment that Ferdowsi began his monumental task. He based his epic, the Shahnameh, or Book of Kings, on a prose compilation of the same name, which itself was derived from the Sasanian royal history, the Khwade-Namag. His genius was not in creating the narrative, but in transforming this prose history into over 50,000 rhyming couplets of breathtaking poetic power. The work is structurally divided into three distinct ages: the mythical, the heroic, and the historical. The heroic age is the longest, dominated by the tales of legendary champions like Rostam, whose exploits form a national mythology. The final section transitions to a more sober historical account, chronicling the Sasanian dynasty from its foundation to its fall. A crucial aspect of Ferdowsi's work was his conscious linguistic choice. He crafted his epic in a pure form of New Persian, deliberately avoiding the extensive Arabic vocabulary that had become common in prose and scientific writing. This act was a monumental effort to preserve, purify, and elevate the Persian language, creating a robust literary standard that has remained the bedrock of the language to this day. Though he began under the patronage of the Samanids, he completed his work under the Turkic Ghaznavid dynasty, whose ruler, Sultan Mahmud, showed less enthusiasm for the pre-Islamic Persian heritage. The Shahnameh was more than a literary masterpiece. It was the definitive codification of Iran's national identity, a cultural cornerstone that preserved the memory, myths, and language of a civilization through centuries of foreign rule and political turmoil. The cultural self-confidence re-established by the linguistic and literary revivals gave way to a remarkable period of intellectual and scientific achievement across the Iranian world from the 10th to the 12th centuries. This Persian Renaissance was characterized by polymaths who made foundational contributions across multiple disciplines. The preeminent figure of this era was Ibn Sina, known to the Latin West as Avicenna, a philosopher and physician of staggering intellect. His work synthesized and expanded upon Greek, Roman, and earlier Islamic knowledge. His most influential work, Al-Qanon fil-Tibb, or The Canon of Medicine, was a monumental encyclopedia that systemized all contemporary medical knowledge. It was so comprehensive and logically structured that it was translated into Latin and served as a standard medical textbook in European universities for over 6 centuries. His philosophical encyclopedia, Kitab al-Shifa, or the Book of Healing, was an equally ambitious attempt to reconcile Aristotelian philosophy with Islamic theology, profoundly influencing later scholastic thought in both the Islamic world and Christian Europe. Another towering intellect of this period was Omar Khayyam. While known in the West primarily for his poetry, in his own time, he was celebrated as a brilliant mathematician and astronomer. He wrote one of the most important treatises on algebra before the modern era, which included a systematic method for solving cubic equations using geometric intersections. In the 11th century, the Seljuk Sultan Malik Shah commissioned him to reform the solar calendar. The result was the Jalali calendar, a work of such precision that its calculation of the year's length is marginally more accurate than the Gregorian calendar developed 5 centuries later. Khayyam's fame as a poet rests on his mastery of the quatrain, or rubai. His collection, the Rubaiyat, explores themes of skepticism, hedonism, and the transient nature of life, a philosophical counterpoint to the era's more doctrinaire religious thought. These two figures were but the brightest stars in a brilliant constellation of thinkers, scientists, and poets whose collective work established the Persian-speaking world as a global center of intellectual innovation. The 11th century witnessed a political reordering of the Iranian world as profound as any since the Arab conquest. The new masters were the Seljuk Turks, a confederation of Oghuz Turkic clans originating from the Central Asian steppes. They entered the Persian sphere not initially as conquerors, but as mercenaries in the service of fragmenting local dynasties like the Samanids and Ghaznavids. Under the leadership of brothers Tuhril Beg and Chagri Beg, this military dynamism was harnessed for their own imperial ambitions. The decisive moment came in 1040 at the Battle of Dandanakan, where the Seljuk forces decisively defeated the powerful Ghaznavid army, securing control over Khorasan and opening the entirety of the Iranian plateau to their dominion. The Seljuk conquest, however, did not lead to the displacement of Persian culture. Instead, it inaugurated a new and remarkably durable political and cultural synthesis. The Seljuks constituted a Turkic-speaking military aristocracy, but they were almost entirely dependent on the established Persian-speaking bureaucracy to administer their vast new empire. This created a distinct Turco-Persian tradition, where military and political power was held by Turks, while the administrative, cultural, and literary life of the state remained overwhelmingly Persian. The Persian language, far from being suppressed, was elevated to the primary language of governance and high culture across the Seljuk realm. The linchpin of this entire system was the Persian vizier. The most exceptional example was Nizam al-Mulk, who served as the de facto ruler of the empire for 30 years under the sultans Alp Arslan and Malik Shah I. His influence was immense. He wrote one of the most important works of political science in Persian history, the Siyasatnama, or Book of Government, a practical guide to statecraft deeply rooted in pre-Islamic Sasanian traditions. Furthermore, he established a network of state-sponsored institutions of higher learning, the Nizamiya madrasas, in major cities like Baghdad and Isfahan. These institutions standardized Sunni Islamic education and produced the loyal, educated bureaucrats needed to run the empire. The Seljuks therefore became the patrons of the very culture they had conquered, fostering an environment where Persian art, architecture, and literature flourished under a new political framework that would define the region for centuries. The sophisticated, albeit politically fragmented, Turco-Persian world of the 13th century was unprepared for the cataclysm that would soon emerge from the eastern steppes. The initial Mongol incursions under Genghis Khan had already shattered the Khwarezmian Empire, which had risen from the ashes of Seljuk power, but this was merely a prelude. The definitive conquest was entrusted to Genghis's grandson, Hulagu Khan, who in 1251 was given a clear mandate by the great Khan Munka to subjugate the lands of the west, eradicate the Nizari Ismailis, and extinguish the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. This was not a tribal migration, but a meticulously planned military operation. Hulagu's army was a disciplined, multi-ethnic force, incorporating the unmatched mobility of Mongol cavalry with the advanced siege technology of Chinese engineers, who were masters of constructing trebuchets and other powerful siege engines. Their advance was preceded by a wave of psychological terror, as tales of their ruthlessness demoralized populations long before the army itself arrived. The first objective was the Ismaili stronghold of Alamut. For centuries, this and other mountain fortresses had been deemed impregnable, serving as the nerve center for the Nizari state. Hulagu's forces systematically reduced these fortresses one by one, and in 1256, Alamut itself surrendered, its legendary library and political structure completely obliterated. With the Nizari power base dismantled, Hulagu turned his attention to the symbolic heart of the Sunni Islamic world, Baghdad. The Abbasid Caliph, al-Mustasim, confident in his city's defenses and his own spiritual authority, refused to submit. In 1258, the Mongol army laid siege to the city. The Caliph's forces were no match for the Mongol military machine. After the walls were breached, the city was subjected to a week of systematic destruction on a scale that had few parallels in history. The Grand Library of Baghdad, the legendary House of Wisdom, was annihilated, its priceless collection of manuscripts from across the known world thrown into the Tigris River until the water ran black with ink. The demographic toll was catastrophic, with estimates of the dead ranging into the hundreds of thousands. The devastation extended beyond the cities. Across the Iranian plateau, the Mongols deliberately destroyed the ancient Karnat irrigation systems, turning vast tracts of cultivated land into barren desert and fundamentally altering the region's ecology for centuries. This campaign was not merely a conquest, it was a demographic and cultural catastrophe that marked the violent end of the Islamic Golden Age. Out of the political chaos that followed the fragmentation of the Timurid Empire, a new power emerged that would fundamentally and permanently reshape the religious identity of Persia. This force was not a conventional dynasty, but a militant Sufi order known as the Safaviya, based in Ardabil. Originally founded in the 14th century as a Sunni mystical order, the Safavids underwent a radical transformation in the 15th century, adopting a heterodox form of Shia Islam under leaders like Sheikh Junaid and Sheikh Haydar. They cultivated a fanatically loyal following among the Turkoman tribes of Azerbaijan and Anatolia, who became known as the Kizilbash, or Redheads, for their distinctive crimson headgear. The Kizilbash viewed the Safavid leader not merely as a spiritual guide but as a semi-divine figure, a belief that gave the movement an extraordinary military dynamism. This religious and military fervour was harnessed by a charismatic prodigy, Ismail I. Ascending to the leadership of the order as a child, he emerged from hiding in 1500 and, with his Kizilbash army, began a swift conquest of Persia. In 1501, after capturing the city of Tabriz, the 14-year-old Ismail proclaimed himself Shah of Persia, inaugurating the Safavid dynasty. His most consequential act, however, was his immediate declaration that Twelver Shi'ism would be the official, compulsory religion of his new empire. This was a revolutionary and divisive decision, as the vast majority of the Persian population at the time was Sunni. The implementation of this policy was systematic and brutal. Sunni mosques were destroyed, and prominent Sunni clerics were given the choice of conversion, exile, or execution. To build a new religious establishment, the Safavids imported Shia scholars from the Arab lands of Bahrain and Lebanon, creating a state-controlled clerical hierarchy that was dependent on the Shah. This forced conversion created a new, distinctively Persian Shia identity, drawing a permanent religious border between Iran and its powerful Sunni neighbours, the Ottoman Empire to the west and the Uzbeks to the east. A sectarian divide that continues to define the geopolitics of the region. The political and religious transformation under the Safavid dynasty found its ultimate physical expression in the city of Isfahan, which Shah Abbas I designated as his capital in 1598. His ambitious urban renewal project was not merely a construction program, it was a conscious effort to synthesize millennia of Persian artistic and architectural traditions into a single, breathtaking statement of imperial power and cultural identity. The centerpiece of this vision was the monumental Naqsh Jahan Square, a space that integrated the core functions of the empire commerce, religion, and royalty into a coherent urban plan. The southern end was anchored by the Shah Mosque, a masterpiece of Islamic architecture that perfected the 4-Iwan plan inherited from the Seljuk period. Its surfaces were adorned with intricate haft-rangi, 7-color tile mosaics, a technique that allowed for more fluid and complex designs than earlier methods. The mosque's enormous double-shelled dome was an engineering marvel, creating a vast interior space with remarkable acoustic properties. Facing it on the eastern side was the Sheikh Lotfollah Mosque, a private chapel for the royal court, unique for its lack of minarets and its ethereal cream-coloured dome. On the western side stood the Ali Kapu Palace, from whose elevated veranda the Shah could observe ceremonies and polo matches in the square below. This synthesis was not confined to architecture. The Safavid era marked the zenith of Persian miniature painting, with workshops in Isfahan producing manuscripts of unparalleled detail and vibrancy. The art of the Persian carpet was also elevated to a new level of sophistication, becoming a major state-sponsored industry and a key export. The enduring legacy of Isfahan lies in its successful fusion of artistic forms that had been developing on the Iranian plateau for centuries, from the grand processional avenues of Persepolis to the soaring iwans of Sasanian palaces, and the geometric precision of Seljuk tilework. It became the final, and perhaps most complete, articulation of a distinct Persian aesthetic before the modern era, leaving an indelible mark on the visual language of the entire region.